Hello, and welcome back to Adam's Fam Anime. I am John, and today I'm going to be doing something I haven't quite done yet on this channel, and that is reviewing anime. Or rather, to be more specific, it's going to be the Disney Plus Star Wars anthology that was recently released. And for those who are unaware, an anthology series is essentially something that could be audio, video, or even book related, where it's essentially multiple stories that are unrelated to each other being packaged into a collection of artwork. Now, with this anthology in particular, Disney Plus seems to have given out the rights for the Star Wars universe and even some of the characters. With that being said, I think it's fair to go ahead and mention now that none of this stuff is canon to the Star Wars universe. But it is very interesting that with each episode, we seem to have a different studio or a different production team and a different animation style. So ultimately, this kind of really makes for a unique experience when it comes to Star Wars fans and anime fans, and people who are fans of both are probably going to get something they like out of at least one or two of these episodes. And when it comes to the expansion of the influence of anime as a whole, it would seem that a lot of these streaming services out there like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and Disney Plus seem to want to dip their toes in anime and kind of at a very cautious pace. Now, when I had initially heard of this project, I was just kind of like, meh. I wasn't super excited about it because I felt that it might have just been kind of a one-shot experience. But the more I look at it now, it seems like this could possibly lead to something greater. But there'll be more on what that greatness could potentially be towards the end of the video. As for now, I'm going to go ahead and get into reviewing each episode very quickly, some things I liked and disliked about them, and some information about the production companies. Now, there are 9 episodes in total so far, and I will do my best to review them quickly, and after I am done reviewing them, I'll go back and rate them in order of my favorite to my least favorite. Also, I should probably go ahead and mention that there may be some spoilers ahead. I'll do my best to keep the information regarding the plots and the characters as scant as possible, but there may be some things that you may not want to hear if you haven't seen the series yet. So if you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch it. Alright, now that introduction is out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and get started with episode 1 of the Star Wars Vision anime series, and it is titled The Duel. So, episode 1 was produced by Kamikaze Duoga, or Dauga. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce that, but they're the production company who was behind the Batman Ninja movie, and I believe they were also responsible and involved in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure series, specifically with Stardust Crusaders and its opening. Now, I first watched this episode without knowing who the production company was, but when I went back and looked at the connection to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I can actually see the similarities in the artwork and design. In any case, with this episode in particular, I do like the art and animation style. The black and white thing is really cool, and it seems like they only choose to color anything that has to do with light or something that gives off light, which is a very artistic and unique design choice. Also, the production company incorporates cell shading into this episode, which I actually do approve of. My only real issue with this episode's artwork is the way the characters move, and also the Japanese feudal era aesthetic that they applied to this episode. It looks nice and it looks fantastic. It's just, it doesn't, to me, fit into the Star Wars universe very well. It's not to say that there couldn't be a planet out there that has this kind of look and feel to it. It felt very too artsy for me, I guess. I'm sure Disney gave them the ability to be as creative as they want and to do their own thing, but for me, as a person who is a casual fan of Star Wars, it doesn't really fit. In any case, artwork aside, we move on to the plot now, which I think it's actually all right. I've always kind of been curious about the concept of Wandering Jedi and Wandering Sith, but this animation studio actually kind of incorporated the story into a Wandering Ronin kind of situation. Now, I won't go in depth about what goes on in the plot, but I will say that there's a trope of Ronin being dragged into a situation to be a hero, and that is definitely applied here in this episode. But as tropey as it might be, you're not going to hear any complaints from me because we get a really good lightsaber fight. Overall, I'd say it was an amazing episode, and it's really good for this story in particular to be the first episode, since there are no past or future narratives involved in this one story in particular. It's kind of a isolated moment in time kind of deal, and that kind of does wonders for setting us up for the concept of this being an anthology and not one singular related story regarding all 9 episodes. So I'd have to say great work from Disney Plus and Kamikaze Doga for crafting up this first episode of this anthology series. Now we can move on to episode 2, which is titled Tatooine Rhapsody. Now, this episode was done by Studio Colorido. I'm not 100% sure how to enunciate that, but that studio in particular is responsible for translating Tite Kubo's work, Burn the Witch, into its film version. And they have also done some work for the Pokemon Company, and more specifically their YouTube channel, and some short episodes and short animation pieces that are on there. Now, while I do like this episode, I will say that the animation style, at least of the characters, I wasn't really a huge fan of, mainly because it's hard to tell the ages or the maturity levels of these characters. If I had to guess, I'm assuming from the relation of the character sizes with the Star Wars characters who actually are canon, I'm going to say that it's just every character is kind of like chibi formed. So with my character qualms aside, I will have to say that I do actually like the animation aesthetics for the background and the atmosphere and the environments in this episode. And they even managed to switch back and forth between certain scenes that have 3D CGI and more traditional 2D animation. Now, typically I'm not okay with that concept, but it actually is balanced pretty well in this episode. So artwork aside, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the story to some extent. I won't reveal too much, obviously, but I will say the story I did like. It was a little more cutesy than episode 1 and a little more campy, but it still had a serious undertone, and the fact that certain canon characters are worked into this story, it actually almost seems like if Disney wanted to, they could make this animated episode canon. I don't think they're going to go down that route, but it is interesting to see that this production studio kind of made that a possibility. Now, when it comes to anime in particular, most people are accustomed to seeing action, and this one does a good job of telling a fun enough or an interesting enough story to where action isn't really necessary or required. And I'd probably even say that the story for this episode is leagues better than episode 1. While episode 1 had a good amount of action and was entertaining, episode 2, however, managed to jump back between two different points in time to tell this narrative that could have taken place over years. So I would say good work by Studio Colorido. As I said before, I'm not really a fan of the character designs, but I will say that I actually did enjoy this a little bit more as the story progressed. I mean, it's less than 15 minutes long, but it does actually get you to want to care about the characters, which is something the first one doesn't really do so well. I mean, ultimately, it was a good episode, and it manages to have a different kind of emotional levity to it than the first, which kind of makes up for the lack of action in this episode. Now we move on to episode 3, which is titled The Twins, and this one is made by Studio Trigger, and they are the animation studio behind Kill La Kill, which to my understanding is a popular anime, and also they have a few other successful properties as well, which I'm not familiar with. Now, starting with the artwork and aesthetics of this particular episode, I am not a fan. I'm just going to say that they look a little bit cartoony in comparison to the last two. And I know it's anime, and anime are basically Japanese cartoons, but it's not quite, I don't know, it just doesn't have that anime feel for me. I mean, I can be pretty confident in saying that I didn't like its character design, I didn't like its design in background or aesthetics. It just was generally unpleasing to the eye to me. But I will say, however, though, that the story for this episode had some serious potential if it were to be expanded on. It obviously, from the title, is attributed to a set of twins who are born through the dark side. And I feel like the narrative was pretty well done. It's just the way that the scenes were played out, especially in regards to the action scenes and the blatant disregard of the laws of physics. It just was a bit much. So if I could give you one thing without actually spoiling the plot for you, it would be to remember that characters cannot breathe in space. I mean, it does make for a really cool area to fight in, and nice artwork in the background and everything. It's just really not my cup of tea. So to summarize on the episode 3 called Twins, it was a great plot idea. I just think its execution left a lot to be desired, and it could just be because the time restraints and it being less than 20 minutes long, but I just didn't like it that much. All right, with that being said, it's now time to move on to episode 4 of the Star Wars anime anthology, and this one is titled The Village Bride. Now, The Village Bride was produced by Studio Kinema Citrus, and they are the studio behind the Eureka 7 movie, A Pocket Full of Rainbows, as well as many other projects such as the OVA for Hack Quantum. While I have seen a little bit of Eureka 7, I am not familiar with that movie, so I can't really speak to the quality of this production studio. However, despite me not seeing the next 7 episodes yet, this is the one I like the most so far. I won't go into too much detail, however, I will say that I do like the settings as well as the animation and character design. I mean, while the characters do essentially have a Japanese anime feel to their design, it doesn't really overtake the concept of Star Wars. I mean, it doesn't fit in, but it seems like it could still be a part of that very same universe. And the story might seem a bit contrived and short, but at the same time, they only have less than 20 minutes to work with. So for what they had, I did kind of enjoy the story. And I will say, with a little bit of spoilerish hint, that this story does involve the Force and how different characters or different races, aside from the Jedi, have come to see and respect the Force in different ways. So pretty interesting stuff there. I will say that there are some similarities between this story and the story of episode 2, but for me at least, this story takes the cake. Now we can move on to episode 5 of the anthology, and this one is titled The Ninth Jedi. This one is produced by Production IG, and they're responsible for the Ghost in the Shell series and a crap ton of movies, a crap ton of video game work, including Tekken, Tales of Symphonia, Star Ocean, Fire Emblem. I mean, in terms of sheer work, this company, or this production company, has the largest resume and the longest resume from what I can tell. Now, when it comes to these anthology episodes, this one to me has the longest resume and the largest resume that I've seen yet. And I gotta say that the experience really pays off here, because this episode is really well done. And I know I just said that about last episode, but that was before I seen this one. The character designs, the artwork, the background work, and even the small amount of CGI that we get in this episode are all really well done. The movement with the characters and the action scenes are very fluid, and in my opinion, it's probably the best I've seen so far in the entire anthology. So when it comes to the animation style, I'm gonna go ahead and give that an A+. And the story's not far behind. It's also really well done, and with the 20 minutes that they had for the episode, the story doesn't feel rushed or contrived in any way, shape, or form. Heck, I mean, it even manages to pull off a little bit of a twist at the end of the episode. So when it comes to episode 5, I mean, I gotta say it's impressive. So when it comes to Production IG, great job on this episode, and I kinda almost didn't want to see it end. Alright, now immediately moving on to episode 6. This one is titled TOB1. And episode 6 was produced by Studio Science Saru. And in comparison to the other production companies, this one has a little bit of an expansive resume as well. They have got plenty of anime and animated movies under their belt, but they've also worked with American projects such as Adventure Time, as well as OKKO. And they also have their hands dipped in some anime classics such as Shin-Chan and Yokai Watch. So it seems like they deal in a lot more kid-friendly media content, and it would appear this episode is no different. It seems to be the most kid-friendly episode I've seen so far, aside from maybe episode 2. Now in terms of animation, it has a really campy style to it, but I will say that it has a very unique feel and aesthetic to it in comparison to the other episodes. I might even say that it kind of has a little bit of a Studio Ghibli feel to it. It's very fluid animation and really cool, grainy, but still artistic design to the background and the characters. And in regards to the soundtrack, this is the first episode that I feel like the music is actually worth mentioning, as the music has this kind of trippy, techno-y, mechanical vibe to it that perfectly fits into the aesthetic of the episode and its artwork. Now, in regards to the story, it has a lot of predictable twists and turns, but for the most part, it does feel a little bit rushed, but it was still entertaining. It was very unique and very different from the previous episodes, but I do kind of like where it went and where it could go if somehow this series were continued. So all in all, it was a great episode. I will say that the story needed a little bit of more tweaking, but for the most part, a really job well done by Science Saru Incorporated. Alright, so moving right along, next up is episode 7, which is titled The Elder. And this one is also done by Studio Trigger, the same studio production company who did episode 3, The Twins. And if you remember, I did say that The Twins, or episode 3, was probably my least favorite so far. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that Studio Trigger did something a little bit different with episode 7. This one has a different animation style. I mean, the look and the aesthetic of the characters and the backgrounds are totally different from the Twins episode. And this one I do appreciate a lot more. In fact, I'd have to say that of all the episodes so far, this one does the best job of blending the art style of traditional anime and also mixing it in with the universe that is Star Wars. In fact, in terms of character design and background design, I'd have to say that this episode feels the most like a Star Wars story. And speaking of story, I have to say that Studio Trigger has done a really good job of flipping it from the Twins episode, where that one felt a little bit cheesy and campy, where it kind of exaggerated a lot of the typical anime tropes and moments. This one is a little more tapered in its narrative, as in it doesn't feel as cheesy or as, corny as episode 3. I'd have to say that I do like the fact that none of the main characters or the characters central to the plot really require a lot of background work. We don't need to get their backstories. The plot carries itself, and subsequently the characters. Now, I will say in the vein of spoilers that there is a lightsaber fight at the end of this episode, and it is by no means impressive or mind-blowing, but it is good enough to pair with the good storyline that is offered to us. So to be quite honest, going into this episode, seeing that it was from Studio Trigger, I was not expecting much, but I will say that I was genuinely surprised and impressed with the difference between this episode and the Twins episode. Now, I will admit that it is a bit of a personal preference of mine to say that the Twins episode was not enjoyable. I'm sure there's many people who will find it enjoyable, but I will just say that Studio Trigger did pleasantly surprise me with the difference between episode 7 and episode 3 of the Star Wars anthology. Okay, now episode 8 of the Star Wars anthology is titled Lop and Ocho. Now this episode is produced by Studio Geno, or Geno. Now this studio in particular is fairly new to the scene. They only have a handful of animes under their belt and a very small amount of other projects. However, they are a subsidiary or a spin-off of a now defunct company called Manglobe. And Manglobe was responsible for quite a few popular series such as Samurai Champloo, Dead Man's Wonderland, and The World That God Only Knows. Now, I can't personally speak as to how a company with those kind of successful properties ended up bankrupt. However, majority of their staff has ended up with Studio Geno. Alright, and now that we're familiar with the production company, let's get on to the episode. Now, in terms of artwork, the episode was fairly impressive. It had this kind of old school 80s, early 90s anime type feel to it, but it still managed to have a modern and polished feel to it. So in terms of its character and background design, it kind of has this post-feudal era Japan feel to it. And despite it having a bit of an older feel than the other episodes, it still managed to hang in there with it in terms of its beautiful artwork. Now, in terms of the storytelling aspect of this episode, Studio Geno does a really good job of condensing a overarching narrative that uses the Empire and its expansion to kind of allegorize the Western influence of imperialism and how it affected the families, the economies, and the ecosystems of the people they were trying to influence or to advance technologically. So I don't want to speak on behalf of the writing team for Studio Geno, but it seems like this episode in particular, or the story behind it, is more involved with allegorizing the socio-economic struggles of post-feudal Japan and Western imperialism. And then the end of the episode kind of feels like they just shoehorned in the concept of Jedis and it being a Star Wars narrative. I mean, overall, it was an enjoyable episode. The artwork was great. The story was great. I just feel like there's some things they could have done to execute it a little bit better. So that's some pretty good work by Studio Geno, and I know they don't have a whole lot of work under their belt at the moment, but I am excited to see where this company goes. And hopefully, after working with Disney and Star Wars on this anthology series, they can get their name out there so that way they can create more hits for us like Samurai Champloo and get a second chance. Alright, now last but not least, of course, I'm going to be talking about episode 9, the final episode of season 1 of this Star Wars anthology, and this episode is titled Akakiri. Now, the studio behind this is the same one who did episode 6, which is titled TOB1. And in a similar vein to Studio Trigger, who also had 2 episodes in this anthology, each of these 2 episodes presented by Science Saru managed to have 2 totally different feels to their vibe and to their artwork and aesthetics. Now, obviously, each person is entitled to their opinion, but in mine, I would say that the artwork for this episode is my least favorite of the 2. I mean, the character design and the artwork of this episode have a really old school Japanese painting feel to them, which is unique on its own right. It's just not my cup of tea. And as unique as it looks and as artsy as it feels, it doesn't quite have that modern polished feel to it like all the previous episodes do. And so of the 9 episodes that have been offered in terms of artwork, I have to rate this one probably among the lowest. However, in a similar vein to the TOB1 episode, I think the audio and the music did a great job of carrying the environment. Now, in regards to the story, I don't think that this episode was quite the best, but for having a 13-minute episode what they did do with it is pretty impressive. I mean, even with the short runtime, what they managed to do with the characters and their backstories, it does provide a fairly decent setup for the conflict. And the conflict at hand actually does kind of have that Star Wars feel to it. But part of me thinks that this is just because they kind of copied a narrative that we've already seen in the Star Wars canon. So I won't reveal the canon plot that this story parallels because that would go into spoiler territory. But overall, as short as it was, I did enjoy this story. And I feel like if it really came down to it, this is one of those stories that could fit in with the Star Wars story or the Star Wars canon. So despite my grievances with the character design, I do feel like this was a pretty okay episode. And in regards to the 2 episodes that Science Saru produced for this anthology, I gotta say that they did a good job. Okay, and now that I've done a fairly spoiler-free review of all 9 episodes of Season 1 of the Star Wars Visions anthology, I am now going to give you my personal ranking for all 9 episodes in order, and then I'll explain to you why my 2 most favorite episodes are at the top of the list and why my 2 least favorite episodes are at the bottom. And as a small bonus for making it this far into the video and what is my longest video yet, I'll also include which of the 9 episodes could be expanded upon and made into canon, or I guess giving credit to the studio and my blessing if they wanted to make a canon Star Wars anime series. Alright, now that I've seen them all, I'm going to rank every one of these episodes from the Star Wars Visions anthology from top to bottom, meaning my favorite to my least favorite. Now, there were 9 episodes total, so what I'll do is I'll start by giving you my bottom 2 episodes, and I will give you my reasoning why. And then immediately following that, I will list off my top 2 episodes and why I rank them so highly. Now, I could go into detail about every episode, but that might take a little too much time, so I'll spend a little time talking about those 4. And then after that, I will create a list of all 9 episodes of the Star Wars Visions anthology, and I will rank them from worst to best, in my honest opinion. Okay, and I'm going to start off with my worst 2 episodes from this anthology. And I'm going to start off with my runner-up to my least favorite episode of the series, and that's going to be episode number 2, Tatooine Rhapsody. Now, ultimately, I just about enjoyed watching every episode of this anthology, but the reason why Tatooine Rhapsody kind of rubbed me the wrong way mainly was because of its character design. Now, I suppose this was kind of supposed to be an artistic expression different from every other episode, but the character design in this episode in particular kind of just made it difficult to tell the age range or the maturity of the characters who are centrally focused on. I mean, aside from that, the artistic quality of the episode is top-notch. The characters even are an expression of high-quality artwork, just like every other character design in the other episodes. But I can't help but feel like the character design was made to be kind of cutesy and campy to match the levity of the storyline. And that's my issue with the story as well. With the story, it just doesn't really fit into the Star Wars universe in the way that it should. Despite this episode in particular having 2 canon characters that people know and love, Jabba the Hutt and Boba Fett, it just kind of feels like the concepts of the criminal underworld and the bounty hunting world were just kind of put on a sideline for, you know, that whole Shonen Jump friendship is everything kind of motif. I mean, and don't get me wrong, the backstory of the main character of this episode isn't that bad. I mean, the whole concept of a lost Padawan kind of ending up in the hands of this, you know, exiled Hutt who is wanting to start a band, that's perfectly fine and everything. It's just a little too lighthearted in a world that contains Jabba the Hutt, or in a story that contains Jabba the Hutt. And in addition, when it comes to the main character, I mean, he was a previous Force user. You can't just ignore that. I understand if his lightsaber is broken or whatever, but this kind of storyline could have lended itself to some action. Now, keep in mind, these are just one humble man's opinions, but I felt like it was directed well. It's just the story didn't really lend itself to be believable or tangible within the Star Wars universe. And considering that Tatooine Rhapsody was the only episode to use canon characters, I feel like they kind of dropped the ball, if not threw it directly down on this one. Alright, and now we can move on to my absolute least favorite episode in the anthology, and that's going to be episode 3, Twins. Now, when I read the synopsis for this episode, I had incredibly high hopes for it. It's just when I saw the character reveals, it was like, hold on a second. I mean, immediately I realized that I wasn't going to like the character design or the fluidity of the movements in the animation. but then as the story progressed, I started to see a lot more flaws within this episode. And this mainly has to do with how bland and how predictable the two main characters are. I mean, they're twins, and one of them falls into the characteristic I'm gonna save you and scream while doing it shonen hero. And then the sister twin is the evil character who just hits every evil trope possible. I mean, the execution of these two characters took a plot that could have otherwise been very promising and then just phoned it in. But my biggest pet peeve of this episode was the blatant disregard for the laws of physics, even in a sci-fi fantasy realm. I mean, you have humanoid characters breathing in space, a lightsaber that can cut through an entire Imperial ship, and what's more, this feat of cutting through an entire ship really just mirrors the hyperspace cut that was the sacrifice play from General Holdo in The Last Jedi. I mean, there are a few other things that I could just nitpick and pull apart about this episode, but there were just so many cringeworthy moments that a longtime anime fan could just feel as predictable and kind of tropey. So those are my reasonings for the bottom two episodes, and with the twins being my least favorite episode of this anthology. Now with those out of the way, I suppose it's time to move on to my favorite two episodes of this anthology. And the runner-up to my favorite episode is going to be episode number 7, The Elder. Now, when it comes to the production studios, I was pretty much disappointed with Trigger's first episode and the twins, but when they came through with the Elder episode, I was pleasantly surprised with how good it was. I mean, for starters, the character designs were a little more practical and a little more in tune with what modern shonen anime has come to be. Now, while the side characters in this episode don't get a whole lot of love and attention to detail, the main two characters, our protagonists, the Master Jedi and his Padawan apprentice, also, along with the antagonist of the episode, the Elder, they appear to have well thought out character, well thought out design, and amazing compatibility in terms of keeping their dynamic attitudes and personalities meshed with this short storyline. Now, the background and environmental artwork was pretty good as well. Not the top notch of the series, but I did like it. Now, when it comes to the story, it was pretty well executed. I mean, it was very short. Obviously, we didn't need a whole lot of background for the characters for the narrative to play out the way that it did. Now, I think the bond and the balancing between the Jedi Master and the Jedi Apprentice worked out very well. Also, I think that the kind of mindset of the villain didn't really portray him as a bad guy per se, but it still managed to have that Sith feel and malevolence. I mean, I really didn't see a whole lot of issues with this story's pacing or anything that was too outlandish with how they executed the story. This was actually a really well done episode and definitely deserves this number 2 spot. And now it is time to reveal my favorite episode of the Star Wars Visions anthology series, and that's going to be episode number 5, The Ninth Jedi. Now, with this episode, I have to give credit where credit is due. Production IG did an amazing job with this episode. They actually went and took time to think this out. The character designs, the background artwork, the storyline, the twist at the end, everything was just well done and well timed. I mean, I gotta say that narratively, to give us a sense of suspense when it comes to such a short runtime for an episode, I just can't help but feel like it would have taken some time and some effort to tweak that to make it a little more smooth and coherent in terms of, a flowing storyline. We even get some representation of a multitude of space races in this episode, all of which are well designed and even accompanied alongside great voice acting. And the great character design and the great audio work aside, they even managed to give us some amazing action scenes. I mean, when we get the main character chased down on that bike and she uses the lightsaber to defend herself, just amazing work there. And then again, shortly after the plot twist, when we get to see that the red sabers of the malaligned Force users reveal their true intentions. And even though the action scenes and artwork were so amazing, enough so that I could probably go ahead and declare this the very best episode, the fact that they did a great job showing us the atmosphere and the mindset of the desperation that the good guys had after the Empire had taken over and killed off most of the Jedis, I think that was very impressive. And probably only really could have been executed by someone who actually is a genuine Star Wars fan. So if you bundle all that up, you get a sacrifice play from the main character's father, a noble one. We also get character growth from the main character, even though we have a very short runtime for this episode. And we also get a well-coordinated sense of suspense that results in a nice plot twist. And with all that greatness, they still managed to work in a little bit of canon lore about how kyber crystals and lightsabers work in the Star Wars universe. I mean, it was just amazing work by Production IG, and I would have loved to have seen more of it. So that was my top pick, and it was really a no-brainer considering all the great things it had to offer. Alright, now I've gone through a pretty thorough elaboration on why those two were my top two and why the previous two were my bottom two. So right here on the screen at this moment is the full list and my rankings for all of the episodes of the Star Wars Visions anthology. So let me know in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree with the ranking that I have listed here, or if you got the time, go ahead and list your rankings for the 9 episodes. And now for the bonus that I had promised earlier in the video. I'm going to go ahead and tell you which of these 9 episodes could fit in the canon and be expanded upon, or at the very least, which one is a candidate for a so-called Star Wars contract. And my choice for that is actually going to be my number 2, that being episode 7, The Elder. And my reasoning for this is mainly due to the antagonist and the location of the episode. Now, the antagonist is seemingly a prior Sith, someone who sees that the Sith were bound for destruction and kind of went his own way. Now, this is a unique concept for the Sith and narrowly doesn't seem to be too out there in terms of Star Wars possibilities. But the reason why I see it as important is because of the last 3 Star Wars movies that Disney released, the main characters seem to want to do away with the concept of the Sith and the Jedi, or at least the black and white natures of their rules that they follow and the alignments that they put themselves into. So if Luke and Yoda seem to think that it was time for the Jedi to end, since they were becoming too benevolent per se and kind of lost the sense of what was important to the Force, I think that the antagonist of episode 7, the Elder, actually kind of played an anti-balance to Rey, where she kind of denounced the Jedi at the end of the series. So if she was more or less a gray Jedi by the end of the franchise so far, then this guy would be a gray Sith. And when it comes to the location, it's in the Outer Rim, which is kind of like the boonies for Star Wars. So if you were trying to turn the main character and his apprentice into living protagonists for the Star Wars series, it could fit in with the main storyline in the sense that they may have remained on the Outer Rim to chase down these antagonistic ex-Sith. I mean, the backstory for the Master Jedi is already there in the sense that he's been familiar and kind of drawn to the Outer Rim. That could explain his absence during the whole Order 66 ordeal. And not to mention, I've kind of always thought that the Outer Rim kind of held much narrative potential for expanding the Star Wars universe, or even the Force users who seem to be scant in the later episodes. So that is my reasoning as to why, if Disney Plus was going to cherry pick one of these episodes to expand upon and make canon, episode 7, The Elder by Trigger Studios best fits that bill. Anyways, that basically wraps up my Star Wars anthology review and analysis video, spoiler free as much as possible. I will say that this has been an incredibly ambitious project on behalf of Star Wars and the included anime studios. And if this has just been a way for Disney Plus to dip its toes into anime, or at the very least open the idea for Star Wars to have a canon anime port, I'm all for it. I mean, in my honest opinion, this is hands down one of the greatest Star Wars projects outside of the main movies that I've seen in quite a while. And I think that some of these studios have also shown that they're entirely capable of producing something that Star Wars could possibly or potentially someday have as a canon story. Heck, I mean, Star Wars aside, I'm sure many anime production studios are probably chomping at the bit to get involved or to sign some contracts with Disney Plus to start producing exclusive material for that streaming service. Now, I personally would see that as a big plus for the anime community and for Disney Plus in expanding the type of material they have to offer for all fan bases around the world. Anyways, the potential growth from Disney and anime aside, I have to say that this has been a very impressive project. Well, that's going to conclude this video. It's already been my longest video ever for this channel. Also, if you guys want to discuss the content about this anthology, let me know in the comment section down below. Also, let me know in the comment section down below if you guys want me to break down the episodes in a more detailed fashion, including spoilers. Thank you guys so very much for making it all the way to the end of the video. It's been a long one. If you enjoyed the content, please like, share, and subscribe. It would help out this channel's growth immensely. In any case, this has been John from Adam's Fam Anime, and I will catch you guys in the next video.